Everyone. On behalf of the Humanists of Tallahassee and the Freethinkers Forum of Tallahassee, as well as our friends at American Atheist, I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar. I'm Devin Graham. I'm the Vice President of the Humanists of Tallahassee and the Assistant State Director for American Atheist here in Tallahassee as well. I have a few housekeeping things before we begin. I've muted you all, whether you like it or not. We're going to hold questions till the end. So at the end of the webinar, I'll unmute you and you are free to ask whatever questions you want. If you don't want to speak out, we have a chat function over on the right and you are more than welcome to type in your questions there. So tonight we have one of my most favorite people in the world, Mandisa Thomas. She's going to be speaking to us tonight. Mandisa is the president and founder of Black Nonbelievers, which is based just north of here in Atlanta. Originally, she's from New York City, and while she was never indoctrinated into any particular belief system, she loved mythology and the mythology behind the God beliefs, and from many cultures, and never understood what made the Christian God so special, which is something that a lot of us wonder about ourselves. She's a bit of a celebrity in atheist circles. I may have accosted her at the Cincinnati airport last year and fangirled out a little bit. Again, I apologize for that. I'm very socially awkward. But you may have seen her on CNN, CBS Sunday Morning, Jet Magazine, Playboy, Atta Girl, as well as tons of different podcasts, and she's very active on the lecture circuit. Last year, she was named as the Freethought Heroine of the Year for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the year before that, Universal Unitarian Humanist Association named her as Person of the Year. So with that, I would like to welcome Mandisa, who will give a talk on the fear of the Black atheist. So take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Devin over here has me laughing and blushing at the same time. That is just always hilarious. But no, I always appreciate almost everyone here, or if you have not ever engaged. My mic was muted. There I go. So welcome everyone, and I appreciate you joining us for this evening's presentation. And thank you, Devin and the Tallahassee community for having me for this discussion. And so before I begin this presentation, I always give a bit of background if you haven't heard it before. And if you did, that's okay, you're going to hear it again. So the title for this particular talk came when I was coordinating a mini tour, if you will, in 2017 in Northern California area. And so one of the stops was at Sacramento City College, and Don Button, who is the advisor for the Secular Student Alliance's group there, we were trying to come up with a title for, because I gave similar presentations to this before, but we were trying to brainstorm a title for this particular presentation. And so he threw out about four titles, because we were talking about how, you know, the subtitle, how religion has crippled the Black community and how that could be too provocative. So the last one he threw out was Fear of a Black Atheist. Now, this is an older white guy, but he referenced his love for Public Enemy. And I don't know if the icon shows does the show of hands thing, excuse me. But there may be some people here, some of you here may know who the rap group Public Enemy is. And if you know me well enough, you know that I am a huge hip hop fan. And so when I saw the title, I just, I fell out, because I thought, wow, it really is an amazing title and it's so appropriate. But I thought, man, if we're talking about, reaching, people. I'm not sure, it might have been a little too provocative, but then I ran it past my sister and fellow board member for being Bria Crutchfield. And she said, yeah, no, you need to go with that one. So I said, you know what? Yeah, that's about right. It's let's go with it, because for one, it does play off of the the Public Enemy album Fear of a Black Planet, which, as we can see by the news that we're hearing, is certainly a fear of when it comes to Black folks, and when it comes to what Black atheists deal with. It's always very appropriate to to note that fear factor, whether it is coming from the outside or from internally. And so this is what I'm going to get into this evening. And some of my some of what I say will be coming from what I see when I encounter folks who leave religion behind, as well as what I encounter within other spaces, white secular spaces, Black religious spaces. So I think that there is going to be a lot of relatability when it comes to this presentation, if you haven't ever seen it before, but I always add something new to it. So we're going to get started right now. So first and foremost, where is my, yes. So I'm going to get into a bit about me. I know Devin gave a nice introduction. So yes, I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers. I'm originally from New York City. Shout out to all my New York folks that are, that are on right now. If you're familiar with that area, it's one of the hardest hit with the COVID-19 pandemic. So my thoughts are always with my family and friends, as well as our BM members there. I did have a non-religious / secular upbringing. I transitioned to full-time activism 2 years ago now. When we started the organization, I was working full-time at the Centers for Disease Control. I was the event services manager there. And this was back in 2011. And so as things progressed over the years, it became necessary, showed that it was necessary to hang up the full-time job, not just with the activism, but also with my family life here. I also, in addition to working with and for Black Nonbelievers, I do also serve on the boards for American Atheists and the American Humanist Association. I also previously served on the boards for Foundation Beyond Belief, the Secular Coalition for America, and the Reason Rally Coalition for 2016. As Devin said, I was the recipient of the Freethought Heroine Award for the Freedom from Religion Foundation last year. I also was a recipient of the Backbone Award for the Secular Student Alliance last year. And I was the UU Humanist Association's Person of the Year in 2018. That is a tongue twister, so I totally get it. And I just linked you all to my Patreon, because that's also another way that I support my activism, and that's how you can help support my activism, as it still needs support. So that's just a bit about me, in addition to being an avid hip hop fan, and also just being raised very much aware of the conditions of the Black community, the institutional and systemic injustices that marginalized people have faced over the years. So I come with that awareness of, and then also engaging people. My job was, I've worked in the hospitality industry for over 12 years before becoming becoming a full-time activist. So I really am, I really can say that I do bring those people skills with me. And this is something that I know can be very useful within our community in particular. So yes, so for those of you who aren't aware, or who don't think that there are more Black atheists out there, yes, we do exist. And so the pictures that you see here are, first and foremost, is the July-August issue of the Humanist magazine. For those of you who don't have a copy, if you don't subscribe to the Humanists and aren't members of the American Humanist Association, you may have received this copy, and I have a copy here. I don't have it with me. I don't want y'all seeing my junky office, but this is a photo. This was in the feature article, the 5 Fierce Humanists, from that issue in 2018, and it features 5 very fierce humanists, 3 of which are close personal friends of mine. And it's the first time that there were multiple Black women that were featured on any multiple Black atheist humanist women that were featured on the cover of any publication. And so the article is still available on the Humanist website. I do encourage you to take a look at it. If you have time, I'll try to link you to it, most likely in the Q&A. At the American Atheist Convention in 2018, which was before, like 2018 was a very, very, it was a very crucial year, crucial in a good way, because that was the year I was also featured in Playboy, and that was where the article came from, was at that convention in Oklahoma City. And upon being interviewed, and when that article debuted, there's a quote from the writer, which reads, "The most encouraging moment of that convention weekend comes when I introduced myself to Mandisa Thomas, president and founder of Black Nonbelievers, an organization dedicated to the support and visibility for Black atheists." Now, over the years, and it was interesting because I was talking about this in an interview that I did today, oftentimes we are asked, well, why is there a need for an organization like Black Nonbelievers? Why do we need to focus on, different groups? We're this one community. We shouldn't be separating ourselves. We shouldn't be dividing ourselves. So we tend to hear a lot of that, even within this community. But there are a number of reasons why, for those who aren't fully aware, or for those who think they may know, why there is a designated focus. There are a few things that must be understood, and I'm so happy now that the U.S. Secular Survey has been released, because there is now sufficient evidence to back up. I mean, there was before, but there is now sufficient evidence to back up the need for our organization. So before we get into we must understand why religion defines the Black community, because it does. So approximately 79% of the Black community still identifies as religious. Now, this is significant because the Black community still makes up about 12% of the US population. Now, the number of nuns are rising. The number of religious nuns are rising. I think it's now still at about 25% overall. So we do make up a huge portion of the demographic, the United States demographic, American rather. But when you compare that to, when you compare that to the population of Black folks, and to have such a high number is very significant. And also, to further understand why, now slavery in the United States forced African captives. I don't like to say slaves anymore, but the system of slavery, which enslaved other human beings, pretty much forced African captives to accept Christianity, and it was forced. But also, and there are a number of slave narratives that are available which detail that. There are also a number of laws on the books that basically detail the forced acceptance of Christianity in the United States in particular. But once slavery and Reconstruction in particular ended, and the institutionalized racism, i.e. Jim Crow, was enacted and enforced in the 1870s, the Black church, and also during the enslavement period, the Black church became that primary support system for Black folks, and it was also a primary community building grounds. I can't say it was always safe. It wasn't always a safe space, because as I would argue, during the Civil Rights era, there were a lot of atrocities committed against Black folks and Black religious folks, but it still was a community building, space, and it did represent many folks in our community for those particular reasons. So that is, so having that background and understanding the role that it played. And yes, there were a number of prominent civil rights leaders who were religious. Of course, we note Dr. Martin Luther King, even though he was very much a progressive, he was very much of a progressive Christian. There were a lot of, and yes, there were a lot of churches that were strategic grounds for the civil rights movement. So we do give credit where it's due, or at least we acknowledge that part of it. And you can read some of these statistics for the number of Black folks that identify at Pew Research. But now we get to the part where religion has crippled our community in particular. And let me preface this by saying that, yes, religion and its beliefs have been harmful worldwide. But when we take into account the doctrine of Christianity in particular, which has forced many Black folks to accept this image of a God that looks nothing like them, and has been responsible for other psychological, harm. And also the fact that, yes, still a very high number of Black folks still identify as religious. We cannot escape, or we cannot overlook the fact that religion has been what I consider a crippling agent. And this is how. A religion and it has hijacked the image of the Black community historically and currently. Now, usually when I'm in person, I ask this question, and feel free to respond in the chat or save it for the Q&A. How many of you have ever heard of Dr. Carter G. Woodson? So I'll just give you a few minutes to, to digest that part. Okay, very good. Yep, some people have. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with, yes, very much, he was very much an educator and a historian. He is most well known for his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, which was released in 1925. He was a Harvard graduate, worked under W.E.B. Du Bois for, I think it was the Crisis newspaper. But he is also the founder of Negro History Week, which eventually became Black History Month. And he is very much a critic. He was very much a critic of the church, the Black church in particular. So it's often ironic, not even often, it's very ironic that the legacy of Black History Month is lost on many. And oftentimes, when we think of Black History Month, we are often presented with a lot of religious folks. Of course, rightfully so, Dr. King is, well etched in our history. But there were a number of Black folks, historian, artists, what have you, who actually challenged the institution of the church, and who rejected religion, and you see it in their work. You can see it in, you can actually see it in quite a few artists and writers' works. But unfortunately, that piece of their work tends to be overlooked or swept under the rug. And oftentimes I never fail to, I never fail to meet someone who has never heard of Dr. Woodson, or who knew that he was a heavy, that he critiqued religion and critiqued the Black church very heavily. And so, oh, goodness gracious. Okay, yes. So it also ignores how Black folks became predominantly Christian in the United States. Now, there has been a shift amongst many Black folks, and there have been some people who have challenged Christianity in particular as being the slavers' religion, the white man's religion, and that is very true. Many Black folks would not be Christian or Christian as it has been presented here in the United States if our ancestors hadn't been forced to accept it. But we often see a number of Black folks who either are unaware of this history, or they, it's also swept under the rug. Or it's often, it is also couched in dismissing the white Jesus for a Black one, which I contend is also problematic. But also, it has severely diminished the critical thinking process and has reinforced dependence on a savior. So it is important to note that during the period of enslavement and afterwards, the role of the pastor and also the dependence on belief, understandably so because of what was going on back then. There was a heavy reliance on one's faith, especially during those times. So we do acknowledge that it played a role in how people coped. However, there has been a reliance on someone or something coming to save us. And as we are still dealing with a number of factors, especially as it comes to systemic racism and injustice, we definitely still see that there is this notion of, well, we can just pray about it, or we're going to look to someone else to come in and resolve this for us. And this has been ongoing for a number of years, which is severely problematic. And going back to the point of diminishing the critical thinking process, many times, many religious folks overall are taught to question a lot of things, except for the belief in God. That's where it stops. And it's very interesting to note that, because again, there is an emotional tie to that, especially within the Black community, which does make it makes it a lot more challenging to have these conversations, especially around religion, and definitely how it relates to other problems within our community. And also, it perpetuates homophobia, sexism, hypocrisy, and also white supremacy. We cannot get around that. And I'm taking from my experience as an organizer and someone who is seen as a leader in this community, and how we still tend to hold up the male voices even within the secular community. That is a byproduct of our societal stigmas and our societal indoctrination, and also how women are treated both within the religious and non-religious communities. And so one thing I've always noted is that there are a lot of people who leave religion, but there's still a lot of baggage that they bring with them. And unfortunately, it spills over. And you may have seen it, but may have bypassed it as something that was acceptable within your religious communities. But once you left, you realize that it was wrong, but you're still carrying those, those characteristics with you. And it's mostly subconscious, but it's something that we now need to make ourselves aware of. And hopefully we're now reflecting on these, on these characteristics. They aren't values at all, but there should be some reflection, hopefully more reflection in the future, on how these characteristics have spilled over into the non-religious community. But yes, the perpetuation of those things definitely has, especially within the Black community, has been a crippling agent. And yes, it definitely overlooks abusive actions that are committed by religious folks and their leaders. And I always reference the late Bishop Eddie Long, but we can go down the line, a list of a number of folks within the Catholic Church and amongst other denominations of preachers and pastors and leaders behaving badly. But yes, it's interesting how we, or many religious people, look to, these leaders as being their moral guides, and they're very, very judgmental of people on a regular basis. But yet when they are caught doing, especially the family values folks, I really can't stand them, and I'm saying this for the record, the ones who are always talking about, their family values and, their view on morality, especially as it pertains to the nuclear family, but yet they get caught doing the very same things that they're preaching against. And their parishioners will just overlook that to say, well, he's still a human being, ultimately God is the judge, etc. But yet these particular individuals were not as forgiving as their regular members if they were caught doing the same thing, which is a very, very abusive pattern. It also takes money from the community, but doesn't sufficiently give it back. There has been a number of defenses. There have been many defenses of the Black church and its quote unquote support for the community, and how there are certain resources that are provided by these institutions for the Black community. And I would say to an extent that is true, but there is also that perception of it being an overall support system that people need, because the collective institution of the church has generated billions of dollars, which you would think would sufficiently have helped our communities in ways that we would be past certain things, but that isn't the case. Much of, and this has started with the prosperity gospel that was, that was invoked in the 1970s, that basically encourages more people to give to their church. The more you give to your church, the more to give to your pastor, the more your blessings will come. And we see this in the number of people who will blindly give to these institutions, and we see a number of their leaders living well beyond their means. Now, I will say that for anyone who is in a position of, if you are representing in any capacity, there is nothing wrong with making a living off of it. But when you're living, when your means is well beyond or well above the people who are supporting you, that there's a serious problem. And there is a documentary called Black Church Inc. that was produced a few years back that talks about this, and you can find it on YouTube. So yes, the financial aspect of giving to the church and giving to one's detriment, which I'm happy to say is sort of, especially in these times, that's sort of shifting a bit. But there are still a number of people who feel obligated to support their churches pretty much at their own financial detriment. And Finally, it keeps people in fear and isolation and from seeking help and solutions that are needed and that are also available. So one thing that I would say that, and one thing I've noted, that even though I wasn't raised religious, I've certainly taken in enough to understand that there is a fear factor, that there is a binding factor that comes along with it, which is something that I'm glad that I've never accepted, but I now understand how other people could, especially when we're talking about, when we're referring to my community. And also those institutional factors of, if you didn't accept this, this belief or this religion or this God, you died. And so that has been perpetuated over centuries. And it has been etched into the psychosis of a lot of Black folks. And it makes you, and it's also been, it's been etched into the identity of the Black community, that somehow being religious, that we absolutely must be. And so once you leave it, it's like you're rejecting your Blackness. So we deal with a number of these factors within our community of what it means to be Black. And it's unfortunate because there are Black folks of all kinds. But when you actually say the dreaded A word, that definitely invokes a fear in the believer. And also it's very fearful for the non-believer, because once you leave religion, also in the church, that community compels you to think that if you leave us, you're all alone. And that is true. That has been true for a number of people, because it is a very isolating experience, and that's exactly what they want. And that is also that abuse factor there, where, oh, if you leave, you're nothing, even though this system isn't making you feel good in any way. But if you leave it, you'll be worse off. And that fear of hell is very, very real. I found that it's very real in a lot of people. And also dealing with other issues, especially as it pertains to our mental health, our physical health, and everything, and our well-beings overall. Having been being deeply indoctrinated. And once you leave, it comes with this, with a very huge emotional cost. And this idea that people are the lone wolf, which also goes back to this idea that we need to save other people. But the one good thing that, so now we're going to get into being and our work. Because as I've noted before, historically, there have been members of the Black, there have been Black folks who have either never believed or who grew up religious and left the church and religion and the God concept behind, because those things aren't always mutually exclusive. And just because people leave Christianity, it still doesn't mean that they leave the God concept behind. And so that's something that needs to be understood. But for many folks who have found us, and before I go further, I will say that the mission, the core of our work is not to get people to stop believing in God. Although if they do, when they encounter us, then that's fine, because that is, but that's a part of individual journeys. But the primary mission and the core of our mission at Black Nonbelievers was to get more people to admit they don't believe in God, which would be very helpful in the future for more research, which I will talk about later. So as I said before, with Black Nonbelievers, if I may have said it before, we got started in 2011, and we were only supposed to be local to the Atlanta area because there were a number of organizations that were around at that time. You had Black Atheists of America that had gotten started. You had Black Skeptics Los Angeles. There was also African Americans for Humanism, which was a subsidiary of the Center for Inquiry. And there were a number of Black atheists who were, and religion doubters, who were convening in online spaces. And that's how I became more acquainted. And that was one of the ways I became more acquainted with the larger Black atheist demographic. And I will tell you, for me, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like, wow, you mean to tell me that there are actually more people like me who think this way? It was, for lack of a better word, a miracle. But when I attended in-person meetings, that was an entirely different story. And I had heard this from from a few Black atheists online when they had discussed their experiences in attending meetups in person, and they being not just predominantly white, but also predominantly dismissive, and also primarily overbearing and tokenizing, and just overall being very uncomfortable. So we identified it was identified and determined that there was a need to build up this community in the Atlanta area, where we met up with more Black atheists in person, and we started socializing, networking, and participating in different events together. But also realizing that it was important to connect with the overall secular community and also the Black community at large. So in our mission, we do encourage open identification if possible. But primarily it was to help other Black folks who had left this behind, had left religion behind, to say, you know what, it's okay, and yes, I'm not alone, and here is a perspective that I can definitely relate to. And that is very important. So through us meeting and through us connecting broadly in the Atlanta area, we also connected with other folks nationwide. We started attending larger secular events, and getting our names out there, getting our organization out there. And in that time, I'm happy to, I'm very proud to say that we have been involved in a number of initiatives. And our organization officially became a 501c3 in 2014. But in that time, and in this time, because we're now in 2020. So in addition to hosting in-person events, as you see here on the screen, one of our speakers was Annie Pearl Avery. I need to check on her, by the way. She's based out of Selma. She was an older woman who I found at the Slavery and Civil War Museum in the Selma area, just across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And when we got to the exhibit about Christianity and its role in enslavement, when I told her about the organization, she actually breathed a sigh of relief. And so it's interesting to start having these conversations with folks, because you never know where they're going to go. And it's important to start having them. And so as you can see here, we've been featured in a number of media publications. One of them was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Devin mentioned Playboy. We've also been featured in CNN and a number of other media outlets. We've also been instrumental as an organization, and our members have provided research for literary work. So as you can see here, we have the Ebony Exodus Project by Candace Gorham, who was also one of the 5 fierce humanists on the cover. She wrote a book on why some Black women are walking out on religion, and others should too. If you weren't aware of this book before, now you are, and I encourage you to get it. It is available on Amazon and through Pitchstone Publishing. Another book that is available through the same outlets is Emancipation of a Black Atheist by D.K. Evans, who actually he's been a speaker with a few of at a few of our meetings, and also conducted some research by speaking to some of our members and myself. We've also provided information for focus groups, other books, and so our organization is very multi-purpose, and it's kind of too much it's a lot to discuss for this particular for this particular session. You know, I could go on and on for hours about it, but I don't want to take up everyone's time. But in 2017, through the course of our work, we had launched the Being Changes Lives campaign, because we have connected with so many people. And I will say that we expanded our organization nationally at the end of 2011, because there was interest in starting affiliate groups or similar groups in different cities. So whereas we started, and like I said, the intention was only to be relegated to Atlanta, and because our primary focus was engaging people in person, offline, and we also started doing and participating in a number of initiatives, we expanded our reach. And so now we've been a nationwide organization since 2011. And in that time, I've had the wonderful opportunity to engage a number of people. And I will tell you that sometimes this work gets hard. It gets hard for me, and it has been hard for a number of people. But we've received feedback from members saying that our organization has not only changed their lives, but we've also saved their lives. And I'm very hesitant to take on the savior role, because that's a lot of work. That's definitely above my pay grade. But I definitely can appreciate that our existence has been life-changing for a number of people. And so I'm just going to read one of them. I'm sure you can see the screen right now, but I'm going to read the testimony, if you will, by Gabrielle Smooth, which says, "Most days I want to die. I struggled with suicide and self-worth for most of my life. One day, I got up the courage to tell my dad about the first man to touch me. The next day, I watched him shake that man's hand in church. Every pain I had to pray away with no relief. My father, his mother, his brothers, and both sisters are ministers. I've always been different and searched relentlessly for people who looked and felt like me. Then I found Being. I love how inclusive you are. You let people discover themselves and encourage us on this journey to be free of religion, aka bondage. The connections alone are worth being a part of your organization. Never go away, please." And so as you read these testimonies, which is testimony isn't a religious word, I've kind of had to get over that myself. And also, it's still a very active campaign. We launched in 2017 because we wanted people to see our members' faces and hear their words and hear their stories. And I've noticed that in the past couple of years, there has been a shift in a few larger organizations that have been wanting to focus on the stories of their members, community building and such. And this is something we've been doing all along, since the very beginning, or from jump rather. And we've actually been putting that into practice for a few years, because we want people to see that there are more of us out here, especially from the Black atheist demographic. And it doesn't always have to come from a scholarly perspective. It comes from everyday people who are living everyday lives and who are dealing with a number of very real things, like many of us. And so that has really been, a huge accomplishment of our organization in bringing people together and also getting them to share and open up. Because openly identifying and openly expressing this has made a huge difference. So the hashtag for this campaign is Being Changes Lives. It can be submitted anonymously, and also it isn't just relegated to our members, but it's also open to allies for our organization, because we have worked with a number of people. And I would like to think that, I can't say that every experience was positive for either us or them, but I would like to think that we have cultivated some really good relationships along the way. And so we love to hear from people who have who worked with us, who are our members. And it costs you nothing. Well, I wouldn't say it costs nothing, but I would say to the cost of your potential relationships with people, that could be a cost to it, but it's great for people to hear not just my words, but the words of our members, our supporters, and our allies to emphasize the work that we do. And so from there, yes, I would love for more. I would love to have more submissions, especially for this year. We're always looking for new folks to submit, and if you'd like to submit your picture, that's even better. So if you are interested in sharing your journey and your story, please do let me know. So now we get to a very crucial part here. And this is for my white folks, and for not just for white non-believers or non-POC non-believers. It could also be for people of color who are believers, and people who consider themselves allies to not just Black non-believers as an organization, but to the Black atheist demographic. And that word ally is thrown around a lot. Diversity and inclusion is thrown around a lot. I'll never forget, as soon as I entered in this community, it's almost like the organizers pounced on us. How can we get more people of color? How can we do this better? How can we be more diverse? That is a constant question that people have. But it seems as if the information that we give, or the perspectives that we give, and it also seems as if we're the only ones that are supposed to give them, seems to fall on deaf ears, and definitely deaf arms, because I always contend that actions speak louder than words. So if you are really an ally, and you ask yourself, are you really an ally to people of color? Are you an ally, or are you committed to being more diverse and more inclusive within your organizations and within your spaces? Because, we certainly think that, I know I do. It's multi-purposeful, once again. It is great to see people of color involved with different organizations, not just ours. And so these are questions that we must ask ourselves, and that you must ask yourself. So I'm going to start with some don'ts and do's, not do's and don'ts. So this is something that I encounter a lot when I speak with different organizations. If you're an ally, please don't assume you can't help. Do not assume that that the issues that Black atheists face and that Black people face overall do not apply to you. That is one of the worst things you can do, is to separate yourself completely from the challenges and the struggles that marginalized people face, that further marginalized people face. Don't assume you can't help as someone who is non-Black. Also, don't assume that we all care about the same issues or even think alike. Much like others and within the Black community, there's always been diversity in thought and perspectives and actions. And one thing that I have encountered and other Black atheists have encountered at meetups or meetings is that there seems to be this weight that we're supposed to carry for our entire community and our entire demographic, as if we're supposed to know every single thing about it. And that is something that's pretty dismissive and dehumanizing, because that's assuming that all Black folks are alike, which we are not. Don't dismiss the importance of our groups. You know, I spent quite a bit of time explaining why there is a need for a group like Black Nonbelievers, an organization, not just a group, an organization like Black Nonbelievers, just as there are organizations like the Secular Student Alliance, Secular Woman. You know, there are different organizations within the secular community. And all of them, all of us, while we have similar missions, there are some differences which may appeal to different people. And if that even appeals, if the difference even appeals to white atheists, humanists, etc., there is certainly an importance and a designated and a need to have a focus, especially for Black folks and other demographics. So it's important not to dismiss, you know, our existence. Also, don't become defensive when we discuss our concerns. You know, the saying "the truth hurts." That is definitely the case for a lot of things. And when we're talking about history, which is very ugly, especially as it pertains to Black folks in this country, the history of enslavement, the history of the enforcement of religion, and the institutionalized racism and injustice, it is very ugly, and it casts a very, very bad light on the white collective. And this is something that even white folks have been affected by globally. So when we are speaking to the realities, the history, the experiences, and the reality, it is not to be taken personally, only if you know you are, or if you have been perpetuating it, whether it is subconsciously or not. But yes, the truth can be very, very ugly and hurtful, but it's necessary, because while there may be some people that may be directing it, you know, personally, but I would say it's important not to become defensive, because once you start putting your defenses up, you stop hearing, you stop listening. But that isn't just on the presenter. That's also something that you need to rectify, especially if you consider yourself an ally. And also, finally, do not say, "I don't see color or race," and basically ignoring racism and its problematic role. Because if we're still seeing predominantly white meetups, predominantly white groups, you aren't seeing the diversity that you're complaining should be there. So when you say you don't see, and yes, race is a human construct, but it is a racist construct that was created by who? White people. So we're not going to get around that. We are not going to get around that, and trying to dismiss that it exists is a problem. Even if you personally had nothing to do with it. It is a white supremacist construct that we need to continue to address and at least try to resolve. And don't always put it on people of color to resolve it. Because we're talking about institutional and systemic problems that we are still trying to come up under. And so saying that you don't see that is very dismissive, and it's also a reason why many Black atheists pull back from predominantly white meetups. So when you start doing these things, you know, you become a part of the problem here. So it's always important to watch that, especially if you say that you care, if Black Lives Matter to you, and if humanity, if you care about humanity and you consider yourself a humanist, then you must also acknowledge, you know, the institutional and systemic problems that have been implemented. There's just no getting around that. But we're not going to end this on a negative note. We're going to go to the do's. So yes, do listen and learn. So we can hear people and hear what they're saying. And most times as human beings and as individuals, when we hear someone talking, we don't hear to understand. You know, sometimes we hear and listen to respond. We want to have a response to it. So it's important to take in the information that is being given to you, or that is being provided. But also do adjust your attitudes and actions when presented with new information. Now, we encourage this, we advocate for this when it comes to believers, right? We encourage them to accept new information and adjusting to it when there's been a factual basis presented. But that seems to be lost on us when it comes to matters of, you know, racial injustice, reproductive injustice, and such within the secular community. It seems to stop when, you know, at church-state separation issues, which of course are important, but at the same time, they all intersect. So when you are presented with how people in our community are treating others, and it isn't to our expectations and standards, because we're human beings, we're fallible, it happens. But when we are sharing these things, you know, it is important to adjust and listen and actually do better. What is the saying? When you know better, you do better. Also, do make sure we're sufficiently a part of input. And that doesn't mean just inviting Black folks to your meetings and trying to get us to attend regularly. Do try to recruit more Black folks for your boards. And also do reach out to other Black organizations and not just Black nonbelievers. Try to find goals that match yours, organizations with goals that align with yours, and reach out to them. And not just playing on the fact that, yeah, that we're atheists and non-believers, because that doesn't always have to be, you know, that doesn't always have to be the sword that you fall on, if you will. But that could also be a good way to encourage people to be a part of the group. And also being a part of input means that some things in your organization may change. There may be some focuses in your organization that may change. And I will tell you that there have been some white atheists and humanists that have been very, very ambivalent and who have fought back against a focus on racial justice issues. I promise you there are many of us who can attest to this. And I'm pretty sure some of my fellow organizers who are white can attest to this as well. There seems to be an old guard within any community that tends to push back against some forward measures and forward thinking. But if you are looking to be more inclusive and diversifying your groups, it isn't just enough to have membership. It isn't enough for membership. It also has to be reflective in your leadership. Do also, and this also goes to what I said about collaborating and participating, and not just with the sole intention of trying to recruit or trying to promote. One thing I'm very big on, and this is with everybody, you know, I'm very big on actually engaging people and relating to folks on the issues that we have in common and what we can work on. And so finding other organizations to work with, they must be continuous efforts. They cannot just be one-time initiatives, especially around Black History Month. only looking for speakers of color when it pertains to certain times of the year will not do you much good. Or it may do some good, but when it comes to the rest of the year, and so this must be continuous. Do find do find other organizations you can work with, collaborate and participate, and make it a reciprocal relationship. And sometimes there may be more that you may offer to them than they may have to offer to you, and that should be okay. Because if you're an organization that has more resources to offer and provide, then that's important, that's important to note. Do have information and resources available. So if you're, if wherever you're located, and there may be people of color or folks who may not be familiar with organizations like Black Nonbelievers, it's important to, to have our information handy. And just, just having it doesn't mean that, you have to push it on them, but just asking, well, have you ever heard of this organization? Whether it is someone who has a sliver of doubt, it's important because, we help walk people through that. And from a perspective that may be much more relatable than, than someone. And it's okay to admit that. It is okay to know when you can speak on something and when you should defer to someone else or to another organization. So do have that information and those resources available. And last but certainly not least, do donate and support. Much like other organizations, our organization needs support as well. And as I stated before, we are a 501c3 organization that is dedicated to community building and growing the demographic. And we do this through a number of initiatives and ways, and that isn't possible without your support. And so in doing that, you can become a monthly or other regular contributor to Black Nonbelievers through our website. And one question that I do tend to get at different events is, as someone white, can we wear Black Nonbelievers merchandise? Of course you can. And if you can see the pictures here, you can see these number of beautiful women who have, who have sported our gear, and who, and folks who support us. And the one thing I will say, I was asked a question on Facebook not long ago, or there was a concern that there would be white folks who participate with Black Nonbelievers and who will try to overrun it. And for anyone who has ever, for anyone who's ever engaged me, knows that no one runs me, regardless of who you are. Now, I encourage teamwork and team building, but, Black Nonbelievers as an organization will remain Black-centered, always has, always will, but we encourage everyone to support us and to spread the word about us. And it is about awareness. And it is about encouraging those folks to be out and, and to be comfortable with their non-belief. And it's going to take all of us to help with that process. So again, regardless as to whether you are Black or not, you do play a part in helping us expand and grow our organization and our membership, which in turn can also help your membership. Because as I said before, I'm very much, I'm very big on team building and teamwork and reciprocation. So these are the things that, if you consider yourself an ally, and are you really an ally, these are the things that you do. One of my favorite phrases is, put your money where your mouth is. And that's something that, we should continue to do. So here's some upcoming events, fingers crossed, and I put the asterisk there because it is subject to COVID-19 circumstances. The first event that is scheduled for the end of September is the second Women of Color Beyond Belief conference. And some of you may have attended last year's event. You may have seen the videos on our YouTube channel. It is the first conference of its kind that has featured all women of color, speakers, activists, authors, etc. And that is one of the beauties of our organization, is that, again, we center our voices, and we definitely are all about women's empowerment. And it was presented by Black Nonbelievers, Black Skeptics Group, and the Women's Leadership Project. Hopefully we will be able to convene in person, but of course we are monitoring the current circumstances. But we will keep everyone updated. If we have to go virtual, we will keep you updated on that. Another event that I'm hoping will take place, and that I'm representing the shirt for, is our annual cruise convention titled BNC Con, which is to take place in November. As of right now, Carnival is set to resume most of their operations in September. And if you have never been on this event, I highly encourage everyone to attend a Black Nonbelievers event, because I guarantee you it will be one of the most rewarding experiences that you will ever have. And there's a mix of interactive sessions. We have speakers. We're going to be doing some service projects on this particular cruise. It's going to be a 7-night cruise aboard the Carnival Magic. Now, of course, amid the circumstances, you know, we are monitoring, you know, the safety practices very carefully, and, you know, we encourage everyone to abide by them. So we will be doing so, especially for this particular event, because it is going to be in a space of quite a few people. And of course, we need to be very careful. So we hope to still be able to cruise this year, but we will keep everyone updated. And finally, the third event is our 10th anniversary celebration that is set to take place in January of 2021. And in 2016, we held our 5th anniversary, where we had a number of speakers, we had a number of sessions and workshops, and this will be no different. This time you will be hearing from other and newer voices, some who have been with us from day one, but some who we have met along the way and are doing some fantastic work. And this will be a great time for us, especially after everything that is going on, because, you know, I know there are a number of us who we miss that in-person interaction. We miss that in-person engagement, rightfully so. But we want to remain as safe as possible. But we are hoping this is going to be another absolutely fantastic event that we will be hosting in 2021. And we will, you know, it's going to feature a number of folks that some of you may know, some of you may not, and it's just going to be amazing. And the information is available on our website. We will start promoting it widely later on this month, but you can find information on it as far as ticketing on our website right now. So now we get to the references and resources part. One of the most recent resources that just came out is Akibu Hutchinson's book, Humanists in the Hood. And if you aren't familiar with her, she was also one of the 5 Fierce Humanists. She is one of my co-producers of the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference. She does have a number of books under her belt. And so if you have, her book was released this year. If you haven't picked up a copy, I highly suggest you do so. It is available on Amazon. She also has a few appearances scheduled with a few organizations that I highly recommend that you watch. We will be featuring her in June for BN's general meeting. And so, you know, I highly recommend you checking it out. Also, Black Freethinkers, someone in the chat mentioned Chris Cameron, A History of African-American Secularism. He will also be one of our speakers for the 10th anniversary, as well as Akibu. And so I highly recommend you pick up his book on the historical aspect of secularism, atheism, and humanism within the Black community. Because that history, as I said before, tends to be overlooked, and it shouldn't be. But also, speaking of CNN, I wrote a op-ed piece a few years back now, about 5 years ago now, but it is still very relevant, titled Confessions of a Black Atheist. And it was released after the 1 hour special that CNN aired on atheists, which was very, very lacking in diversity and inclusion. And that could have been for editing purposes, but that part was, it was not lost on a lot of people. So luckily it was, followed up later on that year by the CBS Sunday Morning special, which featured more voices, especially from Black nonbelievers. But I highly recommend, if you can, read that op-ed piece that I wrote for CNN. And ironically, today, someone reached out to me on Facebook and referenced a contradiction by Jeremiah Kamara, who is absolutely one of my favorite people in this community. He was also one of my inspirations for getting involved in the movement. It is a documentary which explores religion within the Black community and the role that the church has played. So if you want to further understand how religion has impacted the Black community, I highly recommend you watching this documentary, as well as his new one, Holy Hierarchy, the religious roots of racism in America. Both are available on Amazon Prime, so you can rent them, or if you have a subscription to Amazon Prime, you can watch it as many times as you want. And also, I mentioned our YouTube channel on previously. We do have presentations from the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference on our YouTube channel, some presentations from our 5th anniversary, a few from other meetings, but also, just if you would like more information about what we do and what we have done, you can certainly subscribe to our channel to support more of our work. So in conclusion, I'm going to quote another one of our members. This is before seeing that video of you on YouTube, I really thought I was the only Black person who didn't believe in a God. I then logged onto Facebook and found your organization, Black Nonbelievers, Inc. The joy I felt in seeing and meeting so many Black people who were skeptical or who outright didn't believe. Thank you once again for being an inspiration and bringing visibility to atheism/secularism in the Black community. It is so needed. Now, I will tell you that this is not what I sought to do as far as being the favorite person of a lot of people, which I really do appreciate, because this is something I actually enjoy. But really, it was because I had to leverage, and I also had to deal with the fear I had with openly identifying as an atheist, especially as someone who was Black, because it can be scary, to initially realize that you don't believe can be a scary thing for a number of reasons. One, the baggage that comes along with being a believer, and also the fear that still is there. But also, once you come to that realization, how it can affect your relationships with your family, your friends, and the people around you. And also fearing that there is no one else there. Many of us have been there. We understand it. But when it comes to especially the Black community and the Black atheist demographic, it is much, much more challenging. We have many more hurdles to deal with externally and internally. And as I said before, it is going to take for all of us to work together and to continue to support each other in encouraging more people with their realization and their identification. And whether you never come out openly as a non-believer or an atheist, that's fine. But it is important for people to know that there are others out here who offer that support, who are providing that support, and who understand what we've been through, especially as Black folks, because there are a number of us who get it. We have faced those fears, and some of us have overcome them. There are still a lot of other factors to overcome, but in doing this together, we can help ease more of those fears and become stronger as a community, as a demographic, and really making our place known in this society as we know it. Thank you very much for watching, for tuning in. I appreciate once again the Humanists of Tallahassee and the Freethinkers Forum and American Atheists for having me speak. And if we have time for questions, I don't know how much more time we have, but if there are some questions that we have.
All right, yeah, we have, I've unmuted everybody, so if you're not wanting to talk, might want to self. We do have a few time for questions.
So the problem with I think with Black people is going to be that a lot of Black people are going to make the argument we can't tell the difference between the two. That's going to be that's.
Can you expound on that? Was that Curtis, or who was that?
Harris.
Who asked that question? I'm sorry.
Or the lady from Georgia. I can't remember her name.
Okay. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that statement? Okay. I kind of didn't. Okay.
Okay. We have a question.
So yeah, there may be some Black folks who may or may not, who may or may not understand this, and that's, you know what, that's part of the casualties
and so that means, to me, I don't think there's a universal following for Kamala Harris in the Black community. So they have to pick. I can't remember the woman in Georgia. I can't remember her name.
Oh, Stacey Abrams, the one who ran for governor.
Oh.
Yeah, but people like her.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fine. I mean, I think
she's universally popular.
Okay, yeah, she's a huge believer. Yeah, Stacey Abrams is a huge believer, which is kind of we get this pit in our stomach whenever Black politicians reference, and they strongly reference, their belief in God.
It doesn't matter to people sometimes.
Which, it gives us this this huge it's like, oh gosh, like again.
But other than those two women I mentioned, I'd have to research who we could pick, because Stacey Abrams or
who do we have to pick? What do you mean?
Stacey Abrams to me is a popular person, and Kamala Harris is a popular name, but I don't think people. She's a former prosecutor, so people are slamming her for that, and I think that's part of the reason. That's part of the reason why she didn't really have any.
Isn't that kind of off topic?
Well, that's interesting, because that also goes into the savior part, right? This goes into the savior mentality of the Black community, that there are going to be differences of opinions that people have, and it almost seems to imply an all or nothing. That, okay, well, certain Black people shouldn't be supported, and we've certainly dealt with this as a demographic, that once people find out we're atheists,
excuses like she's a DA and they don't like it.
Okay. I don't think they're
different conversations.
Right. Yeah, I guess that might be something that but I would say, to bring it back to the discussion, is that as this is why it's important for us to speak up. This is why it's important for us to continue to engage and make our voices heard, because especially as we become a huge part of the voting bloc as non-believers and as secularists, it's going to be important for us to state that, because our representatives need to know who we are, and even our Black representatives. There's been a privilege, there's been a religious privilege within the Black community for a long time. And as now a lot of these politicians understand that there are certain demographics that they need to reach out to, like the LGBTQ community. I know that Stacey Abrams was one of them. You know, she reached out to, you know, certain communities that are considered progressive. It may take some time, but this is where I said before, this work gets hard, but it's still very important for us to, you know, for us to continue to do.
I think a lot of the politicians that, you know, pretend to be religious really just go along, just to go along with the program. Because I know I live in an area where I think I'm probably am the only black atheist within 50 miles, but I used to go to Philly and I met a lot of the atheists there. I met you also at the Greece rally a few years ago. I don't know if you remember or not, but I know a lot of them stay in the church long after they stop believing because that's what's expected of them, and they didn't have the courage to walk away from that. And there's probably still people now who say they're atheists and still continue to be involved in religious activities, particularly because their family, maybe their spouse. My wife is a Baptist. I don't go to church anymore, but she does. She knows I'm an atheist too. But I think a lot of people just go along with it, the program, I guess it's easier that way than to have to go through the hell that you have to go through in a black family saying that you're a non-believer.
That is very true, and that's, again, one of the reasons why we exist, because we know that there are still a lot of black folks who are so, they're still so heavily involved in their religious communities that it can be difficult to walk away from. And certainly we don't begrudge folks that. But for me, self-agency is so important. And it is important for us to, you know, to find that identity and become so comfortable regardless as to who is involved. And there is also a fear that, like I said before, when you walk away from your religious community, you know, there are people who feel isolated and they feel like there's no one else who can understand, and that isn't true. And so it's going to take for those who are still so wrapped up in their religious communities, whether it's benefiting them financially or not, because that is the case for some people. You know, there's certainly, we can reference the Clergy Project, in which there are a lot of pastors who are atheists, but it is their livelihood. Now, as much as I encourage people to be as courageous as they possibly can, everybody isn't like us. Everybody doesn't have the stones, if you will, to be as upfront and out as us, which is why I would encourage those people who are still in the closet to support our work. Because if you can't be open with it, certainly you can support our efforts, because we are doing a lot of what some people cannot. But I also do say that there are a lot of people who can do it, but it's a scary thing. You know, it's a scary thing to walk away to find, you know, new people, but it's possible. And that's where the encouragement piece comes in. That's where the support comes in, because our community is so intellectually, you know, we're so intellectually inclined, and we think that, you know, the literary work only supports our, you know, our mission and our work, but that isn't true. There are a number of people who, when they leave religion, they need that support and that encouragement because they aren't getting it from those religious family members. And it's up to those individuals to understand that they are not alone, and that there are other people that they can and they should connect with, whether it is openly or anonymously. So, but yes, it is very, very powerful. The church has a very, very powerful stranglehold still on the Black community, which makes it very, very difficult for a number of individuals. And they still don't even know that we exist. But again, this is how we work together as a community to change that. So I was asked a question by Todd Sanders, do I see BN joining in efforts to stop Black voter suppression? We have actually joined forces with a number of secular organizations for the Secular America Votes campaign, because we encourage, there are a lot of people especially Black folks that are disenchanted by, or they're disenchanted by the voting process. And I thoroughly encourage people to get involved and vote as much as possible. This is what our ancestors fought and died for. We need to be exercising our right to vote, and also to get, there is no physical suppression. There's only mental suppression now. And some of that is self-inflicted, but that is due to the historical, these are due to historical factors. But it's important for us to exercise that right to vote, and also get involved in politics, especially local politics if you can. Even if you aren't running, know who your local representatives are, as well as your national representatives, and do exercise that right. So yes, we are encouraging people to vote. Of course, as an organization, we can't tell you how to vote, but getting involved in that process is definitely important.
By physical, what do you mean by that?
So, historically, Blacks were physically prevented from voting back during the days of the Civil Rights Movement, right? There were laws in place, or even once, Blacks were given the right to vote, in certain cities and certain counties, they were actually physically threatened from voting. Hold on a moment, Curtis. Hold on. Okay, so I don't know what's going on there, but yeah. So there were actually physical threats of violence and harm to prevent Black folks from voting, and that was primarily from either whether it was the Klan or other organizations. But now it's more subtle, I would say. And I know that there was a case before the Supreme Court that struck down something within it struck down a clause in voter in the voting laws that they didn't deem certain something necessary. I need to do more research on that, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of folks who, there's still a lot of voter fraud in certain counties, and that's why I said that there are a lot of folks who are, they're very jaded about that process. It's still very important, though, to exercise that right to vote. I know people think, politics can be mundane. It can be, if it isn't an election year or a presidential election year, it can be very voting. It can be very boring. Yes, there are the bots, and that's where also that critical thinking piece comes in, because there are some folks who would, there are some folks who would be so incited by the racial tension that they may be dissuaded from voting. And it can be very, very divisive. So it's important to try to see through that as much as possible.
Awesome. We are technically out of time. I don't know if there's any pressing questions that anyone wants to ask. But I will be posting this talk on YouTube. I also put all the links that Mandisa mentioned up. So if you want to find, you can get to those. Mandisa, thank you so much. This was fabulous. This was really great. And with that, I guess I'm going to thank everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening and tuning in. Some of you I know very well. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time, and definitely I hope to see you all again. Some of us are connected on social media, and thank you, and thank you very once, Devin, for thank you once again, Devin, for having me, and thank you for the Freethinkers Forum, the Humanists of Tallahassee, and American Atheists. I really appreciate you all.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good night.
Night. Will's yelling at me because I was touching my face too much.
you know, someone asked a question.
Oh crap! Yes, but the American.
Well,
Yeah.
African Americans for Humanism, unfortunately, it is not an active group anymore. Center for Inquiry dissolved it last year, as a matter of fact.
Oh.
So we are now the longest running Black atheist organization that is still active. We are the most recognized, and I do appreciate that. You know, I appreciate that because we put in that work. Along with a few other organizations, and I appreciate everyone who supports us. But yes, African Americans for Humanism is no longer an active subsidiary.
Okay.